At this point, most of us learn the basics of the electromagnetic spectrum somewhere in middle school. You got that little zone of visible light, and then a huge amount of radiation our eyes can't perceive, from gamma rays up through radio waves. Since we can only see such a thin slice of the spectrum, our concept of color is very limited compared to the full spectrum of light, but it's kind of what we're stuck with. But if you told Lovecraft about the wide spectrum of light humans can't see, he'd get a funny look on his face, say something like, "You mean there exist colors that man has never seen? What might they be capable of?" and go write The Color Out of Space, a story about a color of demonstrably visible light that is nonetheless nowhere on the visible spectrum. This is what happens when you don't have the constitution for math. Anyway, the narrator of The Color Out of Space is a surveyor examining an area in the middle of nowhere, Massachusetts, because they're planning on diverting a reservoir there. During his meanderings, he comes to an area referred to as a blasted heath. It almost looks like it was burned, but nothing ever grew back. The trees around the edges are sick and rotting, the plants are all growing weird, there's an inexplicably creepy well in the middle, and the narrator wisely decides to head back to town and prompt some NPCs to fill him in on the regional lore. Conveniently, the area has a local old crazy person. Always a goldmine of information in a Lovecraft story. This one named Amy Pierce, who's more than happy to regale him with colorful tales of horror. So the story begins with a meteorite crash landing by the well in the otherwise sedate and charming forest estate of one Nahum Gardner, a friendly farmer with an idyllically charming family. Some folks from the nearby Miskatonic University swing by to examine the meteorite and are surprised at its small size. Nahum says it's shrunk since it landed, and also it glows in the dark and hasn't cooled down since the impact. The Miskatonic folks attempt to break off some samples, but find the meteorite is soft like plastic and gouges rather than being chipped. They take it away for tests, then come back for more because the material is reacting very strangely to everything they do to it, and also vanished completely overnight. As they carve out another chunk, they hit a little bubble in the rock. It's a small embedded glob with a mysterious color unlike any seen on Earth, and when they hit it with a hammer, it pops and disappears. The next day, they come back for more meteor but find it's completely vanished. A storm blew in overnight and struck the rock with lightning over half a dozen times, and apparently that made it stop existing. Nahum is of course an instant celebrity on account of the magic rock, and as a bonus, all his crops are growing in really big and glossy. But when the time comes to harvest them, Nahum finds they're all completely inedible. They've got a nasty aftertaste, unlike any seen on Earth, and they have to scrap the whole crop. The animals around the farm also start growing weird. Nahum's family is on edge, and everyone's basically avoiding the farm with the quiet understanding that whatever the meteor did to it wasn't good. All the trees start blooming in mysterious colors, unlike any seen, and they seem to move on their own without any wind. The Gardner family basically holes up in the farm and has a collective silent nervous breakdown. Nobody's even surprised when Mrs. Gardner goes crazy and gets locked in the attic, and also starts glowing in the dark. Just move away! All the plants in the area start turning gray and disintegrating, and though Pierce warns the Gardners that the well water started tasting suspicious, they keep drinking it anyway. Then one of the kids goes crazy and starts screaming about colors in the well, unlike any, and gets locked in the attic too. Then the crazy kid dies somehow, and the youngest kid vanishes when going out to get well water one night. After 2 weeks of radio silence, Pierce finally works up the nerve to see how Nahum's doing and finds him ill and delirious and very much alone. Pierce goes to check in on the wife and finds something indescribably horrifying curled up in the corner, leaking mysterious colors unlike any seen on Earth, and writes her off as pretty thoroughly dead. When he heads downstairs, he hears some pretty disgusting noises, plus a sploosh from the well outside. He also notices the house glows in the dark now, and finds a very disintegrating Nahum has dragged himself to the base of the stairs for some last-minute exposition. He explains that mysterious color, etc., is alive and living in the well, and is sucking the life out of everything around it. It came out of the meteor, those weird color globs were probably seeds, and they've been feeding on the family and their farm as they grew. Anyway, Nahum dies, and Pierce gets the heck out of there to report the deaths. He returns with some investigators, they investigate the well, and find a whole lot of skeletons, including the 2 missing children, plus some weird spongy junk at the bottom, unlike any seen on. And then everything starts freaking out. The horses freak out, the trees freak out, everything starts glowing, and the crew wisely decide to vacate the area before anything else happens. As they exit the glow radius, they see a lot of mysterious colors, unlike any, erupting out of the well, and then the entire area lights up and the light blasts into space, leaving nothing but the blasted heat. But Pierce reveals one final scrap of horror. As the light left, he saw one weaker blob of light try and fail to escape the well before falling back in. It's still down there, which is why he's so spooked, and also so glad the area will soon be entirely underwater. Narrator guy, thoroughly creeped out, decides to never drink the water from this reservoir, and also briefly contemplates if Pierce is still being affected by the horrible color and whether that would explain why he's never even left the area.